you go.
Grab my bill. Here, let me grab my bill.
Did you say,
Basically, just to start the conversation on whether or not this should additional legislation, let people start talking.
okay, and this is for 307?
Two.
Oh, 209, okay. Thanks. All right, welcome. I'm Andrew Manival, sitting in for the chair. This is a session on the HR 209, and I would like to open the hearing for input. Thank you. I recognize Representative Infantine.
When we first heard this bill, the two bills we're hearing today both came over from the Senate. Relative electronic wage payment, one passed by the Senate, came over to us. And my notes indicated we had a lot of conversation whether or not we felt. Sorry. We had a lot of discussion whether or not we felt this should be mandated. I tell you that the personal issue I have with these cards is, while I may be accused of being an old man and liking the old way we did things versus technology. I remember our clerk, John Mackey, he liked a check, and that's what our law says. If you want a check, you can get a check. And I understand employers are trying to be more efficient. They're not doing their own payrolls in a lot of respects. They're hiring payroll companies, and the payroll companies, it's more costly for them to issue checks and send them along, so they've gotten into these cards. And I have no problem with the cards. The problem I have with the cards is the fees. I really do. You know, the one thing, you all remember your first job. I remember my first job. I was a landscaper. You know, made $4.50 an hour in high school. And, you know, we had a place where we could go and cash our checks. But if I had to pay $1 every time I wanted to use a debit card, or $2, you know, every dollar counts. And for some, $1 a transaction or $2 a month or something doesn't matter. And then you say, well, you can take that card and for no fee, take it all out and cash it. Well, I guess you can do that. I just don't like, if we're not going to mandate. My buddy Mike Cahill, we have had discussions all summer. I enjoy emailing with Mike, and there's certain things that we or I don't like to mandate on businesses. That's what makes New Hampshire different from a lot of things. We don't mandate on businesses what to do, and we try not to mandate employees having to do things. And I just, unless you can come up with a better mousetrap, the way this one was explained to us and the fees associated with it, no disrespect to a company wanting to make business in capital, you know, capital way of doing business. Capitalism. I think they make a lot of money off fees, and I'm just not a real fan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Adjutant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think even outside of the preference issue, one of the big issues I see with the pay cards is the insecurity of the reliability of the payment. If you have one of the pay cards, odds are it's through a third party of a third party, and the actual process of getting their attention if your payment is short, late, untraceable, is far more complicated than just reaching out to your employer and asking for the issuance of a second check. That is terrifying. If you are a person who, like the majority of people, live paycheck to paycheck, and you have an unexpected turn in the unavailability of the money that you've earned, then that can create other problems. As much as I would love to see pay cards go entirely, I would be content with just not mandating it at this time.
Thank you. Representative Seaworth is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take the devil's advocate position for a moment here. and jostling my memory for what we talked about back in the spring. First of all, if my recollection serves me, this is part of the bigger picture where what we're talking about is what the law basically says, what are acceptable payments, and then secondly, what is the order of preference. And if I remember, the first preference is the direct deposit. If the employee has a bank account and wants direct deposit, the employer must offer that. So what we're talking about here is what is the fallback position. And that fallback position is if you either don't have a bank or you don't want to use it for some reason in a direct deposit capacity, what must the employer do if the employee requests it? The answer now and has been for some time, a check. This law would change that to make the default position a pay card. But again, remembering that it is, if the employer likes a check and the employee likes a check, you could still go that way. It's just if there's a disagreement, what is the fallback position? So I wanted to make that clear in everybody's mind as we're discussing this. The second thing that I recall is when we talked about the fees in the discussion in the spring, we were assured that those fees don't apply in the cases that we're talking about, that no employee should have to pay fees to get their paycheck, and it's only kind of extra stuff that might incur fees. And we, as a committee, we were a little uncomfortable with that. I don't think we like taking one bank's assurance that this is the way it's going to work when that protection's not in law. So that seemed to be a sticking point, but it's not entirely clear to me what the full answer is on that. So having said all that, it is kind of a rhetorical question to the committee. Is there a solution to this? And because that's what we're here to talk about today, is if there is a better version of this bill that might be acceptable, then I would vote to recommend future legislation. If, on the other hand, the answer is, you know what, this is just all wrong, then I understand that as well. But I wanted to offer that as a framework for our discussion here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. The chair recognizes Representative Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe the Representative Seaworth is correct in most of what he's saying, but just to clarify, this bill would make it so that the paper checks were no longer required. Any employer who did not want to do paper checks anymore could say, I won't do them. And that fallback then would be the payroll cards. And the problem with what we were told was that each pay period, every employee would get one withdrawal from that payroll card without charge. So that assumes that they are going to go to the bank and take all of their money out, or as much money as they feel they're going to use during that pay period, and take it from the card to avoid fees. The problem is that the people who are probably going to get stuck with the payroll cards because they don't have a bank, or because they're living in dire straits of some form, they're not the most sophisticated people in the world, and basically they would probably be delighted to have a debit card that they could use on a regular basis to buy a bag of chips, or fill up the tank or whatever. And those additional transactions are where the additional fees come in. So that, I believe, is the objection that some of us have to the cards. So I think I do know what the solution is. The solution is, to leave it alone. I have no problem if the payroll cards are available to an employer and employee who both think that they're desirable, or think the fees are acceptable. But I think the current law says you must provide a paper check if that's what an employee asks for. should stay in place. So I would suggest that no additional legislation is necessary. Thanks.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Adjutant.
I also believe that Representative Seaworth's recollection is correct as far as the uh, the belief among the financial institutions that testified that employees would have access to one full-out cash withdrawal. Um, I guess the thing that I wonder is, would that be a thing that goes into statute, and would that statute be constitutional? Because you can take the promise from the financial institutions that the employees would have access to that one withdrawal. I wouldn't bet anything on that, but point withstanding, I would be interested to see how the like if you have a company that's based out in California or Oregon or in a different state that's New Hampshire, how would the legality of an enforcement of a one withdrawal without fee hold up in the wake of the Wayfair decision a few years ago? I don't know. That would be a gamble that I would not want to take. So I would concur on not moving legislation forward on that.
The chair recognizes Representative Seaforth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to answer that to the best of my ability because I think we did look at a similar issue in this bill. And the answer from the Department of Labor on that similar issue was that their enforcement ends with the employer. So if an out-of-state bank was not living up to the legal obligations in providing that pay card, our Department of Labor would go after the employer for providing their employees with a non-compliant pay card because you are correct. They can't regulate a bank that isn't a New Hampshire business.
The chair recognizes Representative Infantine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, one of the things that I've watched over the last 20 years is as I've gone from, you had to remember guys, some of you older folks, you had to get to the bank by 5 o'clock on Friday to have cash. Not you, people, some of us, all white-haired people here. Remember you had to get to the bank by Friday at 5 for money for the weekend? And if you ran out of money for the weekend cash and you didn't want to put it on a credit card, if you were lucky, you had a little card at the grocery store where you could get like a $50, you could cash a check at the local grocery store because they already signed up with them. And then when these bank cards showed up, they were just, you could make a deposit or get cash. There was no what you could do with it now. So, at almost 60 years of age, I've seen all this thing happen. And we try to push things, and, sometimes they just happen by themselves. I don't know how many people out there, other than our clerk, who is an owner of his company and still wants a paycheck every week or whatever, and gets that. How big of a problem is this? Are there that many people that don't want a card? Are there that many people that don't want direct deposit out there? Is it that burdensome to employers? We didn't hear one employer, I believe, that I recall, come in and say, oh yeah, it's a major cost for me, it's a major problem. And since I am in the insurance business and I see so much computer fraud and hacking, I've had 3 claims this year of people getting in and stealing money from people's accounts. Unfortunately, they let them in. Computer genius over here, our Representative Prout, probably knows more about some of this nefarious stuff than I'd like to even know exists. So I don't know. I like to err on the side of caution. I'm showing my age here, but it would be nice if it worked out where employers could save money. It could be more efficient for the employee. But again, whose problem are we trying to solve here? Usually if this was big enough, I would think the BIA would be coming in here saying, guys, this is a major problem. This is making us non-competitive with the other states around us. We need to do this as a state to keep up, to be able to retain and keep employees and bring them to New Hampshire. I didn't hear it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Does anyone else care to be heard on this piece of legislation? Chair recognizes Representative Avellini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Without beating the dead horse, if a payroll card is requested by a employee under this, either the amendment or the original bill, there will be a roll-up cost to having that card available to the employee in a timely fashion. Losing the card, the original bill had 24 hours of being notified, so if they lose it on a Saturday, they're not going to get a card till at least Monday morning. So that part is just unworkable. In the original bill, it was taken out of the amendment. But we have no definition for A, B, or C. We have definitions for D and E. I think A, B, and C work very well. Payroll cards, again, I think we only heard from a payroll company about payroll cards. And the checks, again, smaller employers don't have access, sometimes some don't have access to or can't afford larger payroll companies and use a smaller company or even their accountant to do their payroll, at least where I'm from. So most of them do direct deposit or checks. Having payroll cards, again, we have one bank in town. Maybe that's not the bank that everybody uses in town, so would that be convenient for the people that work for you? Some towns don't have banks. So it would be difficult to have that accessibility with the cards, and then, the same thing with the checks. So I think leaving well enough alone going forward would be in our best interest, unless we have, like Representative Intertine said, a call to move to payroll cards as a permanent solution to checks. But we haven't heard that yet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Prout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So kind of how I see this bill is all about changing what the position will be if the employee and the employer can't come to otherwise an agreement. And currently the fallback position is a check, and this would change the fallback position to a payroll card. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we're talking about what happens when they actively disagree. Something else that's in our current law is that essentially if the employee doesn't state a preference at all, then the fallback position is also a check. I'd be much more okay with changing the default if nobody expresses an opinion to a payroll card. But changing the default when there's an active disagreement from a check to a payroll card, I have a lot bigger qualm about, because there might be reasons that the employee actively dislikes the payroll card. And so changing the default of the employer, if the employee says nothing, I'd be fairly okay with. But changing the default when there's an active disagreement, I think is something that is much more contentious.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Sullivan.
Just want to remind all of us that the real default is the direct deposit. That's what almost everybody does. I like direct deposit. I think most of us, given that option, would choose direct deposit. What we're dealing with are the outliers. The few people who either will not or cannot do direct deposit. Most of them are people without bank accounts. So this is a small number of people who will either get a check or will get a payroll card. And in either case, it's a very, very small number, because the vast majority of folks in New Hampshire are very happy with direct deposit. It's incredibly convenient. There's no worries about 5 o'clock at the bank or fees or anything else. The money just shows up and you start spending it as soon as it's there. I think it's not that much of an inconvenience to require an employer to provide a check to very few people who simply are unable to do the direct deposit. Or, we still have situations. I remember, I think during the hearing, I referred to the people who don't do direct deposits as dinosaurs. I was approached by one of our colleagues after the hearing with a smile on his face, but he says, I guess I'm a dinosaur. But at any rate, it's a very small number of checks or a very small number of payroll cards. Um, You'll never have a fee. Well, you could have a fee, but basically, you have to be able to cash that check without a fee. And the payroll cards can very well turn into fees for people who can't afford it. So again, better to do nothing than to do something that hurts folks. Thanks.
Thank you. Do any other representatives want to be heard on this matter? Seeing none, I will request that someone offer a motion.
I'll act as clerk. May I have those pages on your right hand, please?
Oh,
I think he does need that one.
Oh, yeah, I do need one of those, sorry.
yeah.
Got it. Ask again for your motion.
Okay, so I request that someone offer a motion on this. Chair recognizes Representative Adjutant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that no further consideration be placed on SB 307? 209.
209. Second is received from Representative Di Silvestro. And
We'll call the roll.
will you call the roll, Representative Infantine? Or do I do it?
Motion is no further.
No, he did.
Oh, okay. All right. So on the motion, Representative Infantine.
Representative Infantine should call the roll.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said
Sorry,
me.
don't worry.
No, I'm sorry. I was.
Representative Avalani. Yes, if you agree with no further legislation. No, if you do not.
Yeah.
Representative Callum, Representative Mackey, not here. Representative Love, not here. Representative Ford, not here. Turcott, not here. Representative Prout.
Yes.
Representative Boyd, not here. Representative Pop, not here. Representative Sullivan.
Yes.
Representative Susi.
Yes.
Representative Baruti.
Yes.
Representative Cahill. Representative Di Silvestro.
Yes.
Representative Schmidt. Representative Toomey.
Yes.
Representative Bouchard.
Yes.
Representative Addison.
Yes.
Representative Seaworth.
Yes.
Representative Infantine. Yes. Representative Mandible.
Yes.
$12 to 0. The motion, I guess, or the recommendation of future, now for future legislation passes. Thank you. We will take a, Mr. Chairman, can we take a 5-minute break so that the clerk can get his work done before we hear the next one?
Yes, we're on a 5-minute break. Thank you.
if you don't mind.
Can't refuse cash, can't refuse check.
Our second and final bill has to do with Senate Bill 377 FN relative to the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorders in state troopers. And I thought this was. Pardon? Yes, yes. This, darn it, I didn't bring the right page. I did believe this had to do with the workers' compensation to and from. So I'm sorry I don't have the amendment with me. I apologize. That was the original bill. So I will open that, open this interim study hearing to anyone who would like to opine. Okay, Representative Adigent, Representative Sullivan, and Representative Seaworth.
Mr. Chairman, can we start off with a motion and then move to discussion after? Is that?
I don't mind. Is anyone objection to that? You're, Brian? You're welcome to make a motion.
I would move to consider future legislation, and if I could briefly speak to that motion.
Yes, you may.
I'm a little confused now because of the new title and the lack of the amendment. I think the underlying bill has a good point, and because it's essentially non-binding, I think it could use more consideration after, but I'm kind of confused as to what we're talking about now. So I suppose that's where I would be at on it.
Representative Sullivan.
If it's okay with the chair, I'd like to take a minute to try to review exactly what this bill is about so we can actually know what we're talking about. And my recollection is that this bill was dealing with state troopers who were in uniform, in their patrol car, and moving to and from workplaces such as a construction zone where they were technically not on duty. And it was a fairly convoluted situation. I found it interesting to learn about, but basically, it meant that if they ended up in a workers' comp situation, an injury, on their way to this work site, they witness some sort of lawlessness. They, as is appropriate, they act on it, and somehow end up becoming injured, dealing with a law enforcement issue on the way to a construction site. They want to be considered on duty, and therefore, or at least they want workers' comp to cover them, even though they're not on duty, I guess is the way it worked. And as I recollect, some members of the committee, upon reviewing this, thought that perhaps there might be other members of law enforcement that may also benefit from this type of provision. And I believe that is how it ended up as a interim study bill. And the question before us is whether or not any further legislation ought to be suggested. I also recall discussion during the hearing of whether or not there was any pressing need expressed from the patrol officers, and there wasn't a lot of testimony to that effect. I mean, I believe their organization came forward, but there was not a lot of others. And if somebody has a clearer or a different recollection, I'd be delighted to have it clarified, but hopefully that's helpful.
I believe your recollection is sound. Representative Seaworth, followed by Representative Prout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too will agree. Representative Sullivan's recollection matches my own, and I think, yes, there was some question on the committee, does this bill not go far enough? Was it too narrow in its scope? or maybe even was it unnecessary? Is it something that workers' comp already would do and isn't necessary in law? And the holdup, as I recall, was that we didn't get that kind of information that at least some of us thought was necessary to being able to act on the bill. So I also would agree with my colleagues that it would be appropriate to resubmit this bill and to get that extra detail that seemed to be absent this time around, and I think we could work with it in a future session. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Prout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My recollection mostly matches what has been said already, and I recall that my big concern was the extreme specificity of the language before us to a certain set of circumstances where we could clearly identify circumstances very similar but just outside the wording that we didn't understand why they were excluded. For example, if two officers are going to a construction site together, one in the driver's seat of the vehicle, one in the passenger seat, the driver's covered but the passenger's not, under the wording we had before us. Similarly, if the officer stopped to do something and the car was off, he was standing right at the driver's door, he wasn't operating the vehicle, he wouldn't be covered. There were so many. The language was so specific to a certain set of circumstances, we didn't understand if there was a reason driving that, or if it was just by happenstance those words were chosen, and we didn't have any testimony to clarify any of that confusion or questions that we had, and so that's why we placed an interim study, as far as I can recall.
Thank you. Representative Avalani.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was several questions that still remain unanswered. One is why this isn't covering county sheriffs. They take their vehicles home. This also doesn't cover local officers that take their vehicles home.
Fishing game.
Fishing game as well. Fire marshals, fire wardens. I mean, we can go across the whole spectrum. That's one. And the problem I have with it is relative to the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder in state troopers, when it was simply traveling from their house to a off-site job, technically off-duty, but in a car and in the uniform of the day. How does that transfer to a post-traumatic stress disorder in state troopers and expanding that definition? That's was also unanswered. If it's just some simple coverage to and from, it seems to be a simple workman's comp, but to expand the definition of post-traumatic stress disorder seems to be we need a little more on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sullivan.
We heard nothing about post-traumatic stress, nothing. So I have to believe that this is one of those bills that the other body hijacked and repurposed. So I think we can set the post-traumatic stress aside, and I'm not. I agree that there are unanswered questions. There are folks that might benefit from it. I think at the time, my sense was, what harm can it do to go ahead and pass this? And if other people need to pile on, we can expand it in the next session. That didn't happen, but I would be supportive of encouraging the involved folks to bring this back, answer some of the questions that we've got, and give it another go. So I would support that.
Thank you. Representative Baruti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one of those cases that leaves a little of the law open, and the insurance companies have very sharp lawyers, and they're not going to want to pay anything they don't have to. So I see an incident happening, and it winds up in the Supreme Court because the Department of Labor won't be able to solve it.
Thank you.
I would encourage us to go next year and do our job.
Representative Sullivan, like you, I also wanted to try to see if we can come up with something, and I did offer a compromise to the lobbyist for the Troopers Association. They took it back to their members, and they were afraid the compromise was narrow and they wanted it broader. Just for edification of what goes on with workers' compensation. If if I am driving to a work site, and that's where I go to work that day, I am not covered under my employer's workers' compensation from my home to my work site. However, if I'm a roving superintendent or I leave my office and I am going to 4 different calls or I go to 4 or 5 different jobs, that is considered on the job, because I'm not just going to the office to start my day or wherever the place is. I'm not going to the restaurant to start my day. That's not covered. However, if my boss tells me to go pick up 4 different supplies of food at 4 different places, I'm covered. So that is kind of the law. There was an article, it's probably sitting on my desk. There was actually a case in New Hampshire that went all the way to the New Hampshire Supreme Court this year about this. There's this whole concept with the Department of Labor and within workers' compensation about this concept of on the way to work. When is it? I think that ruling will be important to future legislation. But there's no question that troopers are driving vehicles, and anyone, one of the things we had a discussion was, well, in uniform. Well, uniform is a officer's uniform, or an undercover officer is in plain clothes. So whatever the uniform of the day is, whatever that is, they are going to they're going to target shoot, because they have to do that as requirements. They're going to continued education. They're going to continue training. They are going to a detail when they're leaving their home. So her first question is, well, should they be covered on the way to those things? My opinion as an insurance guy, I think yes. They're driving a company vehicle. They're on the way to do that as part of their job. Then the question was, well, if they happen to see something go on where they have to, there's a bad situation going down and they're a mile away, even though they're off duty, they call and say, hey, I'm here, I'm going to go. Or they stop on the side of the road to see a stranded vehicle or a car accident, they have to engage. So when they engage, that's when it should start. Again, all these things get complex and they have to be well defined. And I think the Supreme Court case will help that happened this year. But without question, I don't think there's anyone here that does not want a sheriff, fish and game officer, state trooper to be injured in the line of duty, and someone have a technicality and say, well, you kind of weren't on duty yet, kind of like, yeah, I don't think anyone was here to do that. That's not the New Hampshire way. So I'm in agreement with all of my colleagues that would like to see this for future legislation. Any additional comments? Okay. So Representative Adigent moved recommendation for future legislation.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Sullivan. So if you would like this for future legislation, you would vote yes. If not, you would vote no. Representative Avalani.
Yes.
Callum, not here. Representative Naki, not here. Representative Love, not here. Warden Turcott. Representative Prout.
Yes.
Representative Boyd. Representative Huff. Representative Sullivan.
Yes.
Representative Susi. Representative Baruti.
Yes.
Representative Cahill. Representative DiSilvestro. Representative Schmidt. Thank you. Representative Toomey. Representative Bouchard. Representative Adigent.
Yes.
Representative Mandeville.
Yes.
Representative Seaworth.
Yes.
Representative Inventine votes yes. 12-0. You want to write the blurb? I'm kidding. Today is the 13th. right, I have no further business in front of this committee. Representative Menaville.
Mr. Chair, it didn't affect my vote, but I would be appreciative if you could either provide information about where to find that Supreme Court case, or maybe send something around if you don't recall now, that would help us look at that for future reference.
I will. I'll send it around. It's on my desk in a pile somewhere.
Thank you. Could I also say I appreciate the chairman's efforts and this entire committee, and it's been an honor to serve with you.
Well, thank you, Representative Menaville. Representative Menaville and Representative Huff will not be joining the legislature next year. And Representative Toomey, enjoy. I didn't realize 84 wonderful years. I didn't realize you were not running again, sir. So thank you very much for your service and for being on this committee. Well, I may have not always made you happy. I hope you enjoyed being here, all of you on the committee. Representative Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the third labor committee I've served on, and I have to say that I've been proud to be a part of all three of those committees. They've all been differently made up. The first committee I was on was a Republican majority. The second one I was lucky enough to be chair of. The third one had Chairman Infantine as the lead on the committee, and I just want to say that if by some stroke of luck I should be in the position of chairing this committee again, I hope I'm able to chair it as effectively and fairly as Chairman Infantine has. I hope I did it that way when I had the opportunity, and I would always keep in mind the manner in which Chairman Infantine ran this committee. And I wish the rest of my colleagues were here, but it is what it is. I just want to express gratitude for the manner in which this committee has been conducted, and it's been the lead of Chairman Infantine that made that difference. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, guys, it's been fun. We will, good luck to all of you. And if I don't see you in your future endeavors, and good luck to all of you who are running again. And if whoever is fortunate to have been reelected by our peers, or we will, not our peers, but our constituents, then we'll hopefully all see you here in December. There will be one study committee meeting held at 1 o'clock. Representative Sullivan, Avalani, Seaworth, and I. No?
I'm not
Oh, sorry. Who am I missing? Kavanaugh and Senator Kavanaugh will be here 1 o'clock. We will be coming to the final report on our OSHA study bill. So if you want to hang out for that, you can. If not, have a wonderful day, everyone.